React.js is a JavaScript library developed by Facebook and Instagram for building user interfaces for the web. If we look at the MVC paradigm, then React.js focuses primarily on the view, the visual components, and that's where its strengths lie. Now, React is very unique in two main areas. First is the UI components. UI components are defined entirely in JavaScript and React.js, and this may not mean a lot to a lot of people, but to a web developer, this means a lot. Well, one, there are no separate templates to work with, and two, you have all the power and the flexibility of JavaScript all in a single place. And I think that's pretty cool. The second, which is the most important feature in React.js, is how it updates the DOM. And I'll show you in a separate video how this works. But for now, let's take a look at this really simple React application and see how things work. So I have a really simple page here. There's no element other than just this div here, container ID called ID container. And this is the location of the target we'll be rendering the element into. Also include here, you see this script called Babel core. This is a compiler. And the reason why we have this is because React.js uses a new syntax extension to the JavaScript syntax called JSX. And JSX produces React elements and defines what the visuals will look like. And so any code that is written in JSX are not understood by the browsers. And so therefore you need a compiler such as the Babel here. And there are others, like for example, JSX transformer. So you need one of those compilers to compile and convert the code to pure JavaScript so the browsers can understand it. Now, with that said, you want to make sure that you include the type attribute, like I have here. If you have an external file, like I have here in the intro to React.js file, you will include the type attribute and specify the Babel here for the compiler. If you don't do this, then your code will not be flagged by the compiler and it won't work. Okay, so that's really important. With that said, let's go ahead and see how we can render a component to this ID container here. I'm going to go into the JavaScript, so I'm going to load my file into this brackets here, the intro.react.js. So this is the basic syntax for rendering a component to the DOM. React.js uses this method called render here, and this is the main method to render all components. It takes two arguments. The first argument you can see here is the JSX code. This is the HTML-like syntax you'll see in a minute here. And they are not HTML syntax. If you see it, you will think that exactly it is HTML, but it's not. And the second argument is the target. The target is where in the DOM tree should I insert this component. And we just saw a minute ago that it's going to be targeted into this div tag called container. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new element here, or a new component here. I'm going to go ahead and write in this method here, React DOM.render. And the first argument is just going to be, let's just say h1, and the text say hello React.js. Okay, notice also I did not put any parentheses around it or any quotation around it, just plain like HTML. The second is the target. So I'm going to call it target. Okay, now target is going to be this. So let's say var target equals, I'm going to call this the document dot get element, or get the element ID, which is container. Okay, so that is the target. All right, and I think that's about it. Okay, so let's render this page, Control S, and go to the browser and refresh. And it's not showing anything. Well, let's figure out why. It says it's not defined for target. Okay, let's see what that is. And because I mistyped. Let's do that again. Control S to save and reload. And there we have it. It says hello React.js. Okay, so this is how you will render a component to the browser, to the DOM. And if you look at the elements tab, you see that it's been added into this div tag, which is container, and you have the h1 added to that one. All right. So back here in the code, usually when you do this, you want to break this into multiple lines. So it's just easier to read. So I'll probably do this. Okay, and then break this into something like that. All right, there is a rule here. Just make sure that your tags here, these are HTML tags, have to follow the XML rule, which means they have to have a closing opening tag. If it's a single tag, you have to close with a single slash. If it's, and all the tags have to be in lowercase. Okay, you cannot have an h1 like this, like that. Okay, in a regular HTML file, that's fine because HTML tags are not case sensitive. But here, it's all have to be lowercase. You cannot have uppercase. That's rule number one. The second rule is because, again, here, this is not HTML, this is JSX. And the rule is that when you create this component, when you render this element, you have to render a root element, a root node. So in this case, it works fine because H1 is the root node, and these are your child elements or child nodes, right? But if I want to go and add another element here, if I say the paragraph, and I'll put the message, say, let's learn React.js. Okay. This won't work because now I'm having two root elements. And this is the same rule that is applied to AngularJS if you're familiar with that as well. So let's say Control S here and let's reload this on the screen. Back on the browser here. And you see that it goes away. It doesn't show up anything here. The container contains nothing. If you look in the console, and it gives you this error message. You see it says adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Okay, so that is the rule. So how do you do this? Well, you can do it in several ways. One is maybe you can enclose this with another div tag like this. And that should be happy now. That's Control S to save, reload. And there we have it. So it goes away. They have a little ticker mark here, but I think just a typo here. Okay, so this is how React works. Now, as soon as you start to build your template, build your site here, as you can see, I don't have any template to work here, right? It's all in here in this method here. Okay, it's all in the JavaScript. Now, typically when you add something to this page, you want to have your navigation, right? So you can say, go in here, say, I'll add my nav here. And of course, this is not efficient as you can see, but usually you do this, href, so go to my home page, something like that. And then here is the link text. And then I'm gonna have another one, so I can press the Control D. And let's add another one here. I will call this is the about page. This is the contact page. Okay, so about, and then the contact. Okay, so I have three links here. And I'm just gonna reload this, save, and reload. So here they are. It's kind of hard to read. So let's just style this really quickly. Go to the HTML file, and I'm going to add another style here. You're going to say padding, maybe 3px. I think that's good enough. Okay. And then Control S to save, reload. So there are links here, and it looks fine. But if you go back to the code, this is not how you would do it as you build your site. Because the heart of React.js is to build as many components as you can. The idea is to break this down into tiny components, and your components should be as specific as possible. Think of a function, right? A function should only do one thing, and it does something else and then returns that value back. Okay, so the same idea applies here. So instead of having this all here, I could move this out into a separate component or another class and then call it from here. Okay, and I will introduce you really quickly about this thing called creating a class. So here is the syntax for creating a class. And there are two ways to create a class in React. You can use the React method here by setting the way you see here, or you can use the scripts method here, which is also very common. So either way is fine. But I'm going to use the React method here to create a new class called navigation or nav. And then we'll add that into the render method here. So above here, I'm going to say nav. I'll say top nav. Okay. So go to React create class. And then in this class, as you can see, it takes a return render method to return the object back. Okay, so it's going to return the components back to this area. So what are we returning? Well, return this whole thing here, for example, right? I can return all that, or I can do entire navigation. So let's move everything here. Control X, and then move in here, Control V. Okay, so I have my nav here in the separate component. And then now I can bring it back here by doing this command. Treat this just like a regular HTML tag. Okay, and if it's a single, I don't have any child elements in this tag, so I close it with that, just like, again, the XML rule. And that's all there is to it. So I break this down to a separate component, separate class, and now my code looks so much cleaner. And let's just do a Control S to save and run this again in the browser, see if it still works. Okay, so we got an error, and it says unexpected token on the nav for return. Well, let's see what that is. So I'm going to return here. I think I have the wrong syntax here. Forgive me. It should be just the parentheses and not the curly braces. Okay, so Control S to save. Reload again. So here we have it. Everything looks just like before. Nothing different here. Looks normal. So pretty smooth. So that is the idea, to break it down as specific as you can. And you can even go another step further by breaking down this into maybe a single component just to render that element itself. But basically, this is how React works. It renders your component through this render method here. And then inside this method here, you can render other components through within itself in the first parameter here. And then you can pass it on. As you can see, I call the top nav. The top nav here can call other nav or call other methods in here as well, and so on. So I hope this will give you a head start on what React will look like. In the next couple of videos, I'll show you some of the features that we just talked about in this first video.